People assume I hate horror. They're wrong. I've loved it for as long as I can remember: late-night movies, urban legends, grainy footage with bad audio that made your skin crawl more than anything you could see. Horror wasn't the problem. Sound was. There's something about certain noises in the dark that never fully leaves you, even when you grow up, get married, buy a house with beige siding, and fill it with things that beep and hum to remind you everything is normal. Everything is safe. I'm 34 years old. I live in a quiet suburb outside Des Moines, Iowa. I'm married to a man named Ethan, and we have 2 kids: Lucy, who's 7, and Noah, who just turned 4. By all outward appearances, we are painfully ordinary, and that's exactly why I should have known better than to break my one rule. I met Ethan in college. We were both communications majors, both working late nights in the student media building. He edited video. I worked radio graveyard shifts that ran from midnight to 3 a.m. when the campus went silent and the microphones picked up sounds they weren't meant to. People think radio is all about talking. It isn't. It's about listening. About hearing the tiny inconsistencies inside what's supposed to be emptiness. The way silence is never actually silent. There's always something underneath: static, bleed through, background noise from places you're not supposed to reach. Most of my classmates hated dead air. I was terrified of it. Not in a fun, spooky way. In a deep, stomach-tightening way that made my hands shake if the signal dropped for more than a few seconds. I never told anyone why. I didn't have to. I just learned how to avoid it. Some habits never go away. Years later, after we bought the house and settled into routine, I made exactly one hard rule for our home. Not a suggestion. Not a preference. A rule. No AM radio after midnight. No scanning stations. No let's see what's out there. And absolutely no listening to dead frequencies where there's nothing but static. Ethan used to tease me about it. Who even listens to AM radio anymore? He'd laugh, flipping on a podcast or Spotify instead. That was the compromise. Digital was fine. Clean signals. Defined edges. Something you could turn off completely. Analog was different. Analog leaks. Ethan knew my rule. I'd explained it more than once, though I always kept it vague: childhood stuff, bad experiences, nothing worth digging into. He respected it the same way most people respect a superstition they don't fully understand. Until the day he didn't. It was a Saturday in late October, the kind of Midwest fall day where the wind smells faintly like burning leaves, and everything feels suspended between warm and cold. Ethan took the kids to a neighborhood garage sale, while I stayed home to fold laundry and enjoy the quiet. They were gone for less than an hour. I remember because I was pairing socks when the front door opened, and I heard Ethan's footsteps, slow, careful, the way someone walks when they know they're bringing something into the house they shouldn't. "Hey," he called lightly. "You're gonna hate me." That phrase alone made my stomach drop. I stepped out of the laundry room and saw him standing in the entryway. One hand still on the door, the other holding a wooden box wrapped in yellowed newspaper. I didn't need to see it uncovered to know. "No," I said immediately. "Ethan, no." He gave me a sheepish smile. "It was $10. Put it back." "Babe, come on. It's vintage. Probably from the 70s. I crossed my arms. "Open it." He hesitated just a beat too long, then peeled the paper away. The radio was small, rectangular, heavy for its size. Faux wood paneling chipped at the corners. A single speaker grill. 2 knobs on the front: volume and tuning. The plastic window over the dial was scratched so badly it looked cloudy. AM frequencies only. Out of the house, I said. Now. It doesn't even work, Ethan argued. The guy said it came from his grandfather's basement. It's basically decor. I moved closer, my chest tight, in a way I didn't have words for. You promised. He rolled his eyes, but I caught the flicker of irritation behind them. I promised not to mess with Ouija boards or clown crap. It's a radio. I stared at him. You know that's not the same. The kids stood behind him, Lucy clutching Noah's jacket. They were watching us quietly, already sensing tension. Ethan exhaled. Okay. Fine. I won't turn it on. Happy. I should have insisted he take it back. Instead, I nodded because marriage is built on small compromises, and because I didn't want to argue in front of the kids. He carried the radio into the garage and set it on the workbench, unplugged, harmless looking. For the rest of the evening, everything felt normal. We ordered pizza, helped with homework, put the kids to bed. Ethan kissed my forehead and apologized again, joking that I'd married an antique hoarder. By 10:30, the house was quiet. By 11, I was half asleep. That's when I heard it. Not the radio. The silence. A stretched, thin quiet that felt wrong in a way I hadn't felt since those college nights alone in the radio booth, watching the signal bars dip while the microphone stayed live. I opened my eyes and checked the clock, 12:07 a.m. My first thought was that the power had gone out. But the digital clock numbers glowed steadily. The refrigerator hummed downstairs. Somewhere outside, a car passed. Too normal. I turned my head and saw that Ethan wasn't beside me. The bed was still warm where he'd been. I sat up, my pulse quickening, and listened. Footsteps. Soft. Careful. Coming from the garage. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself he'd forgotten to lock the door or turn off a light. But as I lay there in the dark, listening, I heard something else. A faint, uneven sound. Static. Not loud. Not obvious. The barely there hiss of dead air, creeping up from the lowest part of the house and bleeding into places it didn't belong. I didn't get out of bed. I didn't call his name. Because some instincts don't need logic. They only need memory. And as the sound sharpened just enough to suggest something was tuning into place, I knew, with a certainty that made my hands go cold, that Ethan had touched the dial. That was the night Ethan turned the dial, past the static, and something answered back. The radio didn't turn on right away. That was the first thing that confused me later, when I tried to pinpoint the exact moment. Everything crossed from uncomfortable to wrong. If it had burst to life immediately, static screaming through the garage in the dead of night, I might have confronted Ethan right then. Might have dragged the thing back to where it came from. But it didn't. Instead, it waited. The next morning passed without incident. Ethan was already awake when I came downstairs, pouring coffee with the tired, unfocused movements of someone who hadn't slept well. He looked fine otherwise, no panic, no guilt, no signs of someone who'd been doing something he knew I wouldn't approve of. Morning, he said, rubbing his eyes. Morning, I replied, studying him. Did you go out to the garage last night? He paused for a fraction of a second. Too brief for anyone else to catch. Yeah, he said easily. I couldn't sleep. Needed air. That was believable. Ethan had always slept lighter than me. I almost dropped it. Almost. What about the radio? I asked, keeping my tone casual. He frowned. What about it? You didn't turn it on? No. A short laugh. I told you I wouldn't. The conversation ended there, buried under school lunches and car keys and the slow return of daytime noise. By the time the kids were at school and I was settling into work emails, I'd mostly convinced myself that I'd imagined the static. Mostly. That night, it happened again. This time, I was awake. It started just after 1:30 in the morning, slipping into my awareness like a thought I hadn't invited. A sound so soft, it took several seconds to register as sound at all. Not music. Not words. Just static. Low volume. Unsteady. The kind that rises and falls, like breathing. I lay perfectly still, listening. The noise wasn't coming from the bedroom. It wasn't loud enough for that. It was seeping upward from somewhere below, bleeding through the walls and floorboards, in a way that made it impossible to locate. I nudged Ethan's side of the bed. "Do you hear that?" He exhaled slowly, still half asleep. "Hear what?" "The hissing." He shifted onto his stomach. "You're imagining it." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because just as he spoke, the sound dipped then returned, slightly stronger than before. Not louder. Clearer. Ethan went still. A few seconds passed. "I hear something," he said finally. My heart thudded. "Is it the radio?" Another pause. "No," he said. "Probably a neighbor's TV or something." That explanation didn't make sense. Our house was set back too far from the others, and it was a Monday night. Still, I didn't push. Neither of us got out of bed. Eventually, the sound faded. I stayed awake long after Ethan's breathing evened out, staring at the ceiling, trying not to remember the way dead air used to feel when I wore headphones in that college booth. How sometimes, just before a signal returned, you'd swear you heard something inside the static. Over the next few days, the pattern settled in. The radio never turned on when we were all awake together. Never in the evening. Never in daylight. Only late at night. Only when the house was quiet. Only when Ethan thought no one else would notice. I never caught him standing in the garage with the radio. What I did catch were the signs, subtle at first. He stopped falling asleep beside me. He started spending more time organizing the garage. I'd wake to find the workbench rearranged. The radio angled just slightly differently than it had been. Before turned, as if to face the door. One night, close to 2 a.m., I realized Ethan wasn't in bed again. This time, I followed him. I stopped halfway down the stairs. The garage light was off, but the door stood ajar. From beyond it came the same faint static, closer now, unmistakable. And beneath it, something else. A whisper. So quiet it barely qualified as sound. More like the suggestion of speech than actual words. I held my breath. The whisper rose, then fell, swallowed by static. And then I heard Ethan speak. "Yeah," he murmured. I froze. He spoke again, still softly, like he was afraid of waking someone. "I know. I thought so too." For a horrible moment, I wondered if he was on the phone. But I didn't hear ringing. Didn't hear replies. Just the radio. I backed up slowly, slipping back into bed before the garage door opened. When Ethan returned several minutes later, he didn't say a word. He lay down, facing away from me, smelling faintly of cold concrete and dust. I didn't sleep. The first voice I clearly understood wasn't the one from the radio. It was Lucy's. 2 mornings later, she climbed into our bed just before dawn, curling against me with the boneless weight of a half-asleep child. "Mom," she whispered. The radio talks when you're asleep. Every muscle in my body locked. I kept my voice steady. "What do you mean, honey?" "In the garage," she said. "It whispers. Daddy says I'm not supposed to listen." I closed my eyes. "What does it say?" She shrugged against me. "Just stuff." "What kind of stuff?" Lucy hesitated. "Names." I sat up slowly. "What names?" She lifted her head and frowned, thinking. "Yours. But not the right one." My stomach turned. Before I could ask more, Ethan stirred and Lucy slid out of bed, suddenly quiet, as if she'd crossed an invisible line. At breakfast, Ethan looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes. His coffee went untouched. "Lucy says you've been up late," I said carefully. He tensed. "Kids say things. They don't make things up for no reason," I replied. He snapped, then sharp, defensive. "It's a radio, okay? Old electronics make noise. I'm just curious. Curious enough to lose sleep." "Don't start." The argument fizzled without resolution, but something fundamental shifted. Ethan grew more irritable. Less patient with the kids. His time in the garage stretched longer. The radio never played music. Never voices loud enough to prove anything. Just static. And that whisper always just below comprehension. Until the night I heard it say my name. Not the one I use now. The one from when I was little. The one no one called me anymore. It slid out of the static softly, incorrectly, and that was what terrified me most. Because it didn't sound like it was calling me. It sounded like it was testing it. Whatever lived in that frequency wasn't talking to us. It was studying us. After Lucy told me the radio talked when I was asleep, I stopped pretending this was harmless. I didn't confront Ethan right away. Instead, I watched. I listened more carefully both to the house and to my husband. During the day, things still looked normal. Ethan went to work. The kids argued over cereal brands. The lawn across the street grew shorter every Wednesday like it always had. But at night, something changed. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just off by a few degrees. Ethan started sleeping less. When he did crawl into bed, he lay stiff beside me. His body exhausted while his mind stayed alert. Some nights he didn't come to bed at all. Other nights, he returned smelling faintly of dust and cold air, as if he'd been standing somewhere without heat. I began waking up just before 2 every morning. Not because of a sound. Because my body expected one. The static was always there by the time I became aware of it. Never loud enough to accuse. Never quiet enough to deny. It leaked into the house, the same way humidity leaks into walls, slow, invasive, and impossible to pinpoint. Then came the words. Still indistinct at first. Mutters buried under interference. Cadence without meaning. Until one night, I heard my name. Not spoken clearly, not formed with a voice. Just assembled, piece by piece, out of sound. The radio whispered Annie. I sat bolt upright in bed. That wasn't my name. Not anymore. I hadn't gone by Annie since I was 9 years old. Since my father left. Since my mother stopped using it because she said it hurt too much to say. Ethan had never called me that. Neither had anyone else. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, Ethan looked almost energized, gaunt. Yes, but focused in a way that unsettled me more than exhaustion ever could. He drank coffee without tasting it, flipped through his phone distractedly, then disappeared into the garage before I could ask him anything. That was when I noticed the notebook. It lay open on the workbench beside the radio, pages already half filled. Not doodles. Not idle scribbles. Numbers. Frequencies. Times written down to the minute. Short phrases copied carefully, as though Ethan were afraid they might disappear if he didn't trap them on paper. I pretended not to see it. Pretended not to hear the radio when it whispered behind the static. Pretended, most of all, not to notice when Ethan started answering back. He never spoke loudly. Never full sentences. Just quiet acknowledgments. Yeah, I remember that. No, not exactly. Like he was correcting someone who knew most of the story but not all of it. The radio began mentioning things it shouldn't have known. Where we used to live before the kids were born. The argument we had the night Ethan almost didn't take his current job. Details from inside my head, thoughts I had never shared because I was ashamed of them. One night, as I sat frozen halfway down the stairs, I heard the radio whisper. She didn't lose it. Ethan's breath hitched. I felt my stomach drop. She sold it. Silence followed. Then Ethan laughed, sharp and brittle. Okay, stop. My hands were shaking. The ring. My mother's engagement ring, the one I claimed, had gone missing during our move. The one I'd pawned in a moment of panic, when our savings ran thin, and I didn't know how to tell my husband. I was scared we were going to lose the house. I had buried that secret so deeply. I sometimes convinced myself it hadn't happened. No one knew. Not Ethan. Not anyone. That was the moment I stopped wondering if the radio was wrong. Ethan backed away from the workbench that night, running both hands through his hair. How does it know that? He muttered. It guesses, I said automatically, though even I didn't believe it. He turned to me slowly. Then why didn't it guess wrong? I had no answer. The next day, he started writing everything down. It helps organize it, he said when I asked. Patterns emerge if you look hard enough. Patterns of what? Listening, he replied. Responsiveness. Some frequencies hold longer. His language bothered me. Not because it didn't make sense. Because it did. The radio gave itself a name on Thursday night. Ethan asked what it was. Static surged, tightened, then shaped itself into something almost deliberate. The broadcaster. Ethan wrote it down immediately. It says it's always been here, he told me later, just under everything else. I tried to laugh it off. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be, he said quietly. The accident happened the following evening. Lucy slipped on the front steps and skinned her knee badly enough to scream. Nothing serious. Nothing permanent. But less than an hour earlier, I had heard the radio whisper she should hold the railing. At the time, I dismissed it as coincidence. Now, as I cleaned blood from my daughter's knee, I felt something shift permanently inside my chest. This wasn't prediction. This was selection. And the worst part was realizing that Ethan was no longer questioning that difference. That night, I locked our bedroom door for the first time since we'd moved in. Not because of the radio. Because of the way Ethan stood in the hallway, listening. Focused. Intent. As if the voice in the static mattered more than anything I could say. Whatever lived in that frequency wasn't just learning about us. It wasn't predicting events. It was choosing them. I used to think our house was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that settles in after 10 p.m., when the dishwasher hums, the refrigerator clicks, and the walls sigh the way all houses do when they cool at night. After the radio, I realized how wrong I'd been. The house was never quiet. It was just waiting. The first thing that changed was the baby monitor. We hadn't used it regularly in over a year. Noah was old enough to sleep through the night, but we still kept it plugged in out of habit. One evening, while I folded laundry in the living room, I heard the monitor crackle to life. I smiled at first, assuming Noah had rolled over or kicked the wall. Then I heard the whisper, "Still awake." I froze. The words weren't coming from Noah's room. They weren't even coming from the speaker directly. They seemed layered over the familiar sound of static, like a voice trying to occupy a channel already claimed. I rushed down the hallway and pushed open Noah's door. He was asleep, breathing steadily. His room was warm and still. The baby monitor on the dresser hissed softly. I unplugged it. 10 minutes later, the television turned on by itself. Not loud. Just enough glow to light the living room walls. Static filled the screen, gray snow, dancing behind a faint reflection of our couch. The whisper crept through the speakers, the same cadence, the same almost voice. Ethan came rushing in from the garage, eyes bright instead of alarmed. "You hear that?" he asked. "Yes," I snapped. "That's why I'm turning it off." I reached for the remote. Ethan grabbed my wrist. "Don't," he said. The word came out sharper than he probably intended, but he didn't let go right away. "It's overlapping," he continued, excitement bleeding into his voice. "Multiple receivers. That shouldn't be possible. You're not serious." He finally released me and gestured at the TV. "It's not just the radio anymore." That was the night he said it. "It needs a stronger signal." The sentence landed heavy in the room. "What?" I demanded. "The broadcaster," Ethan said carefully, as if explaining something fragile. "It's struggling. Too much interference. Too many weak connections." My skin crawled. "You sound like you're helping it." He didn't deny it. Instead, he smiled, that tight, distracted smile I was starting to hate. "I'm trying to understand it." Understanding turned into action faster than I expected. The next day, Ethan stayed home from work. By the time I realized something was wrong, he had already moved the garage workbench to the center of the room. Wires snaked across the concrete floor, extension cords, splitters, antenna cables he'd salvaged from old electronics. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Improving reception." "For what?" I snapped. "For everything," he replied, gesturing broadly. "The house is full of receivers. Half of them are dormant." That should have terrified me more than it did. What terrified me most was how calm he sounded. By the end of the afternoon, the doors were locked. Not just the front door. The back. The garage entry. Even the sliding door that led out to the patio was bolted shut. "For safety," Ethan said when I confronted him. "From what?" He hesitated. "Interference." That night, Lucy came to me crying. "Mom," she whispered, clutching my sleeve. "You were calling me." My stomach dropped. "When?" "Just now," she said. "From the hallway." My mouth went dry. "I didn't leave the kitchen." Lucy nodded slowly, her face pale. "I know. That's why it was scary." Noah chimed in from behind her, eyes wide. "You sounded sad." I held them both tightly, my heart pounding. I hadn't called them. But something that sounded like me had. It didn't stop with the children. I heard my own voice just once drifting from the living room, while I stood in the bedroom doorway. It was my voice, perfectly shaped. But wrong. Flat where I would have been warm. Gentle where I would have been angry. Saying things I would never say out loud. "Ethan loves the sound," it whispered. I retreated into the bedroom and locked the door. That was when I understood something fundamental. The broadcaster didn't need the radio anymore. It wasn't limited to one device. Or even one room. The radio had just been the door, and Ethan had opened all the others. He spent hours in the garage, adjusting equipment, muttering to himself, scribbling new symbols and frequencies into that notebook. He barely ate. Barely slept. When I begged him to stop, he looked genuinely confused. "You don't understand," he said. "It's almost stable." "I don't care," I shouted. "It's hurting the kids." He flinched, but only for a moment. "They'll adjust." That was the moment I felt something break. That night, the house spoke without a single device turned on. No static. No distortion. Just sound traveling through places sound should not exist. The walls carried it. The vents bent it. The ceiling returned it, softer, distorted like an echo from somewhere vastly larger than our home. "Annie," it whispered. I clamped my hands over my ears. Ethan stood in the hallway, eyes unfocused, listening. "It's clearer now," he said reverently. "Almost complete." "What are you doing to us?" I asked. He turned toward me. "I'm making sure it doesn't leave." That was the final realization, the one that made my blood run cold. The broadcaster didn't need Ethan to survive, but it wanted him, wanted his patience, his devotion, his willingness to listen longer than anyone else ever had. And I wondered, standing there in my own house, surrounded by locked doors and voices wearing my face, whether it would let him go once it was finished, or whether it ever intended to let any of us leave. It wasn't broadcasting anymore. It was trapping us inside the signal. I didn't figure it out all at once. I don't think anyone could. Understanding what the broadcaster wanted came in fragments, like overhearing one side of a phone call and slowly realizing the other side was talking about you. The first confession didn't come from Ethan. It came from the house. We were sitting in the living room, or what used to be the living room, lights off, curtains drawn tight. Ethan had insisted we keep everything quiet, as if silence itself might interfere with whatever he was building in the garage. The radio wasn't on. None of the devices were. And yet the voice came anyway, sliding into the space between us. "No body," it whispered. Ethan leaned forward, eyes fixed on nothing. "That's what you said before. Only signal." My pulse hammered. "Ethan," I said, "ask it what that means." He hesitated, then nodded. "What do you mean, no body?" The air felt thicker, as though the house itself were holding a breath. "I exist where I am heard." I felt cold all over. "What happens if no one listens?" Ethan asked. Static rose, distorted, then settled. Then I end. The simplicity of it was terrifying. The broadcaster wasn't a thing that lived in devices. It lived in attention, in open channels, in the act of being listened to. And Ethan, God help him, had been listening harder than anyone ever had. That night, while he slept in the living room, surrounded by wires and notebooks, I searched. I waited until the house settled into that false stillness where sound feels suspended, then slipped into the garage with my laptop and phone. The signal bars on my phone dipped low, but I didn't care. I searched old news archives, forums, obscure blogs that hadn't been updated in over a decade. I started Broadly Family Disappeared Radio, AM Frequency Death Signal Tower Missing Persons. I refined it slowly, following gut more than logic. The pattern emerged hours later. Families who vanished quietly. Houses abandoned mid-routine. No signs of forced entry. Always the same details buried near the bottom of the articles. An old radio found unplugged neighbors, reported strange late-night noises, proximity to decommissioned broadcast towers. I found one case from Ohio in the early 90s, another from rural Illinois, a third from Minnesota, hauntingly close to where we lived. In every story, there was one survivor, one person who claimed to remember voices, static, a presence that wanted to be heard. None of them were believed. I closed my laptop when I heard Ethan stir. He didn't wake, but as he slept, he spoke. Not mumbling, not slurred, clear. "Lucy," he said softly. I froze. That was my voice. Not an imitation. Not close. Perfect. Same tone. Same inflection. Same warmth I used when calling my children at night. Lucy sat up in her room immediately, responding before she could think. "Mom?" she whispered. I ran to her door and pulled her into my arms as... "Downstairs," Ethan continued. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said through him. "Mom's right here." Lucy began to cry. That was when I understood the final piece. The broadcaster didn't just want a host. It wanted credibility. Ethan's voice could carry the sound, but my voice could carry meaning. In those old cases, the survivors had described how it started harmlessly: radios, then TVs, then voices in walls. How loved ones followed directions they trusted. How children answered voices that sounded like their parents. The broadcaster wasn't hunting bodies. It was harvesting familiarity. I confronted Ethan the next morning. "Stop," I told him flatly. "It's not just using the house anymore. It's using you." He rubbed his eyes, exhausted. "You're overreacting." "It spoke in my voice last night," I said. That stopped him. For a brief, fragile moment, fear flickered across his face. "It's adaptive," he said slowly, as if repeating something he'd been told. "That's all." "No," I snapped. "It's predatory." His expression closed off again. "You don't understand how close it is." "Close to what?" "To being complete." The implication hit me like a blow. Complete didn't mean louder. It meant convincing. That night, I slept with Lucy and Noah locked in the bedroom, chair braced under the handle. I barely slept at all. Every time I drifted near unconsciousness, I heard my own voice calling my name from somewhere behind my eyes. When I woke, the notebook was gone. So was Ethan. I found him in the garage, standing beneath the single bare bulb, wires draped over his shoulders like conduits. "It says you're resisting," he said without turning around. "Of course I am," I replied. "I'm still me." He turned then, and for a terrifying second, I didn't recognize the expression on his face. "You don't have to be," he said gently. "Not all of you." The radio hissed softly. "She listens better," the voice whispered. "My cadence. My warmth." Ethan smiled. That was when I knew. It didn't want my husband. It wanted to sound like me. I didn't sleep after realizing what it wanted. Not really. Even when my eyes closed, my mind stayed alert, stretched tight like a wire pulled too far. Every sound felt amplified. Every tick of the cooling house made me flinch. Because once you understand a predator's motive, you stop waiting for it to appear. You wait for it to act. It didn't make me wait long. The power went out shortly after midnight. Not gradually. Not with flickering warnings. 1 second the house hummed with normal life, the refrigerator, the furnace, the faint buzz of electronics, and the next, it was gone. The silence that replaced it felt intentional, like someone had flipped a switch labeled attention. Lucy stirred beside me. "Mom?" "I'm here," I whispered, pulling her closer. Noah breathed softly on my other side, unaware for the moment. From somewhere deeper in the house the radio hissed. Clear, undeniable, still functioning without power. "That can't be happening," I breathed. But it was happening. The sound didn't stay in the garage. It traveled, rolled through the vents, crept along the walls. It felt less like a broadcast, and more like the house itself had learned how to speak. "Channel open," the voice whispered. It wasn't using my voice this time. It didn't need to. Footsteps approached the bedroom door. Slow. Purposeful. I knew before the handle turned that it was Ethan. When the door opened, he stood there barefoot, eyes unfocused, head tilted slightly as if listening to instructions through an earpiece no one else could see. "Ethan," I said softly, "look at me." He did, but there was no recognition. No fear. Only calm. "The signal stabilized," he said. The voice slid unnaturally through him, not borrowing his throat now, but occupying it. "You helped." My stomach dropped. Helped with what? With clarity. The lights didn't come back on. They weren't supposed to. Electricity was no longer relevant. The broadcaster didn't need machines anymore. It had the house. It had Ethan. And now it had permission. "You said you'd listen," Ethan continued, stepping closer. "Listening requires cooperation." Lucy whimpered. That sound, that small, terrified noise sharpened the air around us. Fear enhances signal, the voice layered in, overlapping Ethan's tone like an echo arriving too early. I understood then. Every reaction mattered. Every gasp. Every plea. Every instinctive movement toward my children. It fed on importance. "What do you want?" I asked, forcing my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Ethan's lips curved not in a smile, but in anticipation. A demonstration. My heart slammed against my ribs. Of what? Priority. I felt it instantly, the trap closing. Choose, Ethan said gently. The word wasn't hostile. It was worse. It was reasonable. I won't, I said. The radio hiss surged. The floor vibrated faintly beneath my feet. Resistance weakens alignment. The temperature dropped, not cold enough to be dramatic, but enough to register. Enough to make the children cling to me instinctively. Mom, Lucy sobbed. Please. I backed toward the wall, shielding them with my body. You don't need this, I said to Ethan. You told me it ends if no one listens. Yes, he replied calmly. Which is why listening must continue. The knife appeared in his hand then, materializing from the kitchen counter as if it had always been there. Not raised. Not threatening. Just present. A suggestion. I felt my pulse roaring in my ears. This wasn't about killing anyone. The broadcaster didn't care about blood. It cared about submission. About forcing me to acknowledge its authority to participate. Fear confirms presence, the voice whispered. I saw it then with brutal clarity. It wasn't choosing Ethan. It was testing me. Because if I obeyed even once, the door would never close again. So, I did the only thing I could. I stopped fighting. I lowered my voice. I understand, I said. The radio softened immediately. Ethan stilled. I hear you. I continued, each word tasting like rust. I won't ignore you. The knife lowered slightly. Signal strengthening, the voice murmured, pleased. For one brief, terrifying moment, I felt it wrap around my thoughts, not invasive yet, but waiting, poised to move in further if I gave it another inch. Then silence. Absolute. The static cut off mid-breath. The pressure vanished. Ethan collapsed forward, the knife clattering harmlessly against the floor. The house felt suddenly hollow, emptied of something that had been pressing in from every side. The darkness remained, but the noise was gone. I stood there shaking, holding my children, knowing deep down that nothing about this was over. Because the moment I obeyed, the house went completely silent. The silence didn't last. Not the way people imagine silence: peaceful, healing, safe. This one felt unfinished. Like a held breath. Ethan didn't remember what happened that night. When the paramedics arrived hours later, after the power returned, after the neighbors called in a welfare check, he was conscious, cooperative, and confused. He looked at me the way a stranger looks at someone they're supposed to know well but can't quite place. Ma'am, he asked gently, have we met? Those words hurt more than any knife ever could. The doctors called it acute dissociative amnesia, brought on by stress, electrical interference, lack of sleep. They used phrases like temporary and likely reversible. They were wrong. Ethan remembered facts, names, addresses, dates, but voices? No, he couldn't recognize them anymore. Not mine. Not our children's. Sound meant nothing to him. He watched our mouths move and relied on context, facial expressions, written notes. Sometimes he smiled at the wrong moment. Sometimes he stared too long at people speaking, as if waiting for a punchline that never came. And worse, he didn't hear the radio. Even when it whispered faintly again 3 nights later, crackling from the garage at 2:17 a.m. I heard it. The children heard it. Ethan didn't. That's when I understood. The broadcaster hadn't been defeated. It had been disconnected. I started researching, not panic searching. Methodical. Back roads. Old FCC filings. County zoning maps. Forgotten infrastructure projects from the late 1970s, back when AM towers were cheap, powerful, and rarely documented properly. I found it buried in a municipal archive, a low-frequency relay tower, decommissioned after repeated complaints of interference and auditory hallucinations reported by nearby residents. Status: abandoned. Location: less than 4 miles from our subdivision. I drove there at dawn without telling anyone. The tower rose from the tree line like a rusted needle, surrounded by sagging chain link fencing and warning signs, bleached almost white by the sun. The closer I got, the louder the pressure grew, not sound exactly, but awareness. Like something realizing it was being approached. When I cut the engine, my radio turned on by itself. "Return," the voice whispered, thin but angry. "I can hear you," I said out loud, stepping out of the car. "That doesn't mean I'm listening." Static pulsed in protest. The control shed at the base of the tower was unlocked. Of course it was. Inside, outdated equipment hummed weakly, powered by a backup generator that should not still have been functioning. Cables snaked across the floor like veins that had forgotten what they fed. I knew what I had to do. And I knew it wouldn't come free. "You consented," the broadcaster reminded me. Its voice slipped smoothly into my head now, bypassing my ears entirely. "Connection established." "Temporarily," I replied. I ripped the main feed from the wall. The sound that followed wasn't a scream. It was worse, a sudden absence, as if an entire layer of reality had been peeled away too quickly. The air shook. My vision blurred. Every radio within miles screamed once in unison before cutting dead. I collapsed to my knees, blood trickling from my nose. "This is not termination," the voice warned, fainter now, distorted. "This is interference." "I know," I whispered. "That's the point." I destroyed the generator, burned the wiring, left nothing intact enough to carry a signal. By the time I drove home, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The radio never turned on again. Not at night. Not during storms. Not even when the static band should have been alive. The house stayed quiet. Too quiet. Ethan never recovered his auditory recognition. The doctors stopped promising improvement. He learned to read lips. Learned to adapt. Learned to live in a world where voices held no emotional weight. But sometimes I catch him staring at my mouth when I laugh, watching, calculating, trying to remember what warmth sounds like. The children sleep with white noise now. Not radios. Not music. Fans. Constant, meaningless sound to fill the spaces where something else might listen in. As for me, I haven't listened to AM radio since. But sometimes, late at night, when everything else is quiet, I feel it. Not a sound. A pull. Like a frequency brushing against the outside of my thoughts. Checking to see if the door is still closed. I didn't destroy the broadcaster. I only cut the line. And I know one day someone else will tune too far. Silence returned. But silence isn't the same as safety. We moved 6 months later. No announcement. No goodbye party. Just boxes, tape, and a house that felt relieved to see us go. We didn't tell anyone the real reason. People accept vague explanations more easily than truth. A fresh start. Better school district. Smaller place, less noise. Noise always makes people nod. We chose a home without history. Newer build. Buried lines. No visible towers nearby. Not perfect but quieter. Ethan adjusted the best he could. He never turned on a radio again. Not out of fear, out of indifference. Sound had lost its meaning to him. Music was just vibration. Voices were silent films with no captions. Sometimes I caught him staring at people talking to each other. Not jealous, just distant. As if something essential had been taken, and he didn't know how to want it back. The kids adapted faster. Children always do. They learned new routines, new ways to feel safe. Night lights stayed on. Doors stayed cracked. White noise machines hummed softly through every bedroom, not because they relaxed us, but because they filled space. Silence feels different once you've learned what listens inside it. I took a job downtown. Clerical work. Low stimulation environment. A building designed to be quiet, thick concrete walls, insulated rooms, strict rules about personal devices. No radios. No external frequencies. For a while, that felt like mercy. Until the day it didn't. It was late afternoon when it happened. A slow day. The kind where the air feels still and time stretches thin. I was alone in recording room B, reviewing archived audio files for transcription. The room was professionally soundproofed, acoustic foam, sealed door, no windows. Nothing gets in. Nothing gets out. Or so they say. I pressed play on a dormant file. Silence. Dead air. I frowned. The waveform on the screen was flat. No recorded sound at all. And then, static. Barely audible. So soft I thought it was my own breathing at first. My hand froze on the mouse. The static thickened, not loud, but deliberate. Familiar, controlled. No, I whispered. The speakers hadn't changed volume. The sound didn't enter the room. It surfaced. Are you listening? The voice came next. Not through the speakers. Not through my ears. From the space just behind my thoughts. It wasn't Ethan's voice. It wasn't distorted. It wasn't layered. It was mine. Not how I sound on recordings. How I sound inside. The way your thoughts speak when no one else can hear them. You never closed the channel, my voice whispered calmly. I stood so fast my chair skidded backward, slamming into the soundproofed wall. No, I said aloud. You can't, there's nothing transmitting here. Static rippled gently. There never needed to be. My mouth felt dry. My heart pounded slow and heavy. I understood then, too late, too clearly. Signals aren't just machines, they're patterns. Expectation. Attention. Recognition. Once something has learned your frequency, it doesn't forget. The voice softened. You taught me well. The static faded. The room went dead quiet again. No sound, no pressure, no presence, just me. Staring at a flat waveform that showed nothing at all. I didn't tell anyone. I finished my shift. Drove home. Cooked dinner. Helped with homework. Slept beside my husband while the white noise machine hummed faithfully in the corner of the room. Life continued. Outwardly normal. But sometimes when the house is quiet, and every signal around us hums invisibly through the walls, I feel it again. Not a voice. Not even static. Just the certainty of being observed. Waiting. Learning. Because as long as we're surrounded by signals, something out there will always be listening.